Hello all of you, and here we're starting part 3 of Gas Exchange, Chapter 18. What we want to look at now is how pressure gradients drive that exchange inside the vessels. And I asked you to do some drawings of this to sort of start getting an idea. We want to compare the oxygen pressure, right? How much pressure is there of that oxygen in the alveoli when you've just inhaled all this air, in the capillaries of the lung once it crosses into those capillaries, and then again in those cells that are receiving that oxygen, right? That's the pathway from the alveoli to the capillaries into those cells receiving them. So these diagrams I think are very helpful. You're thinking of them as the very first ball at the top is the alveolus. So you've inhaled that air, and if you remember when we calculated what that pressure was, it was at around 160 when it's in the atmosphere, when you're calculating the partial pressure. But once it's in the alveoli, it's been humidified, it's coming through the trachea, the tracheoles, and they've just gotten all the way down into the alveoli, and it turns out that that pressure now is around 100. So it's dropped already. So that's the pressure that you have of this oxygen trying to get out of the alveolus into an area. It can only move from high pressure to low pressure. So it's going to move into an area of lower pressure. So if you think of this region here of venous blood, that venous blood is going to be lower in oxygen pressure, correct? Because you've already distributed to the cells. So this is perfect. Then you know that this 100 here is higher than the 40 that's in the venous end of the capillary. So this is going to be able to cross through. And more will cross through and more will cross through until those two pressures are equal. That's as much as you can put in there. It has to be higher pressure to lower pressure. So now the capillaries are loaded, and you have 100 millimeters of mercury, and they're circling around in these capillaries. It's going to little vessels, and it's going to distribute to the cells. That's the whole point. You're trying to get air from the alveoli to the cells that need it. So these numbers are important. If it's coming in as 100, it's going to be about equal, and then when it gets to the cell, it's going to unload a little bit, so it'll go down to 90. Unload a little bit more, it'll go down to 80, go down to 70, and how far will it go? Well, until the pressure of that cell, that oxygen pressure in the cell, is approximately equal. And what is that? It's around 40. So when this gets to, when the capillary is around 40, there's no more oxygen that can cross. So then now we're at 40, 40, 40, 40, and we go pick up again at a place where it's at 100. So oxygen will cross over. So this is a nice diagram showing sort of the cycle of loading and unloading, and then going back for more. Loading, unloading, and then going back for more. Okay, so it's that pressure gradient, the fact that there's more pressure in one area, lower in the other, that's going to allow for that movement of those gases. So that's oxygen. If you think of carbon dioxide, now we're going backwards. You're thinking first of the cell. The cell's doing its metabolism, and then instead of 40 millimeters of mercury, it's let go some carbon dioxide, so it's higher now, it's 46. So this pressure then is higher than that regular pressure in a capillary, which is around 40. So 46 being higher is going to be able to move some of that CO2 into here until that too reaches 46, and then it can't move anymore. So now we have this higher CO2 pressure. Ordinarily in arterial blood it's about 40, and here it's at 46. So we're going to transport that, and if it's at 40 in the alveolus, then I'll be able to move it into the alveoli, and out you exhale that air. Okay, so in this case, it's pick up here, transport, and get rid of it. And then it goes back down to 40. Given that this is lower than the cell, it's going to be able to cross again. Pick it up, transport, eliminated through the alveoli. So I do want you to know those numbers, get an idea of that, because it gives a really nice context to how that movement is happening due to those pressures. There's a really nice YouTube that I posted for you in the other section I'd like you to look at about those changes in pressure. So are those the real values, like exactly 40 and exactly 100? Well, it's not. I just wanted to give you an idea of what it is. So the partial pressure of oxygen arterial is about 95, but there's a range. So I don't need you to be memorizing all this. The 100 is fine as a sort of as an average, but I want you to know it's not that precise. And venous is about 40, what we said. And then when we're talking about CO2, we use the number 40. It's more like a range from 35 to 45. And in the venous, it does go up to about 46. And this is for pH that we didn't talk about. So those are the real values then in pulmonary medicine. And this is just showing again in the alveolus, crossing over to a region that was originally 40, and it's going to convert it to 100 and keep moving until it reaches 100. And that's what's driving that oxygen into the blood. The higher pressure in the plasma, lower partial pressure of oxygen in the tissue drives oxygen into the tissues. So it's kind of like diffusion, right? But we think of diffusion of gases, and we talk about it as partial pressure of gases. The respiratory membrane, do you remember? We have a huge surface, about the size of a tennis court, with millions of alveolar sacs. And it's very thin, it's one cell thick. It's a short diffusion distance. We talked about that already, this diffusion distance. And those membranes are so close together that that crossing of that gas is quite easy under good conditions. Quite easy when you're healthy, but the system does fail. So when it fails, what are some of the things that could be happening? Well, hypoxia could be happening, where you have too little oxygen in the blood, too little coming to the brain, and it can result from many things, from the low oxygen actually in the alveoli, or the oxygen exchange in the capillaries is too low, or something's wrong with the transport, not able to transport it in the blood. Now I want to show you some pathologies that are shown in your book with such simple diagrams, but these simple diagrams are a really nice illustration of some of the conditions that could be happening. So they're just drawn with a little, grape-like alveolus here and the capillary. That's all. And we're going to look at these, how different emphysema, fibrosis, pulmonary edema, and asthma look from normal. So let's take those one at a time. In emphysema, there's a destruction of the alveoli, and it reduces that surface area for exchange. So I'm going to want to draw that for you better here. And if these alveoli were perfect, you would see these alveoli that look like this. Right? And each one of those would give a big surface area. Now, what happens when you have emphysema, these start to break. So this starts to break apart. This starts to erase. Let's see if with an eraser pen. Oh, it erased the whole thing. But you could have pieces of this that are intact and others that are not. So you would have leftover pieces like this, and they would connect into one big one maybe, and this maybe would be a big one because this separation here was destroyed. So you're reducing that surface area for that gas exchange. And so this drawing just draws it like this, and that gives you an idea of the destruction of those alveoli. Fibrotic lung disease is when that alveolar membrane becomes thickened, and we talked about this. I gave an example in coal miners, or if you worked with asbestos, you would also be irritating that. And so what would happen is that those alveoli, even though they're intact, they would have this big thick layer here, and that makes it much harder for oxygen to come through across that fibrotic membrane. Pulmonary edema. So you had you'll have a case study. You had a case study where you were looking at pulmonary edema that could happen when the pressure in the capillaries was too big due to an abnormality in the left side of the heart, and blood is backing up, and those capillaries then are leaking, and it's leaking fluid. So you have fluid in this area now. And that fluid now is going to make it much harder for that oxygen to cross here, come across the fluid, and back into the capillary. So pulmonary edema then is going to be a big obstruction to the passage of that oxygen. Asthma. So notice how they drew asthma here, very simple drawings, and they narrowed it here. So everything here is normal. There's no fibrosis. These are intact. They're all looking great here, big circles. But what happens is that the intake here is very narrow. And if it's very narrow, it's the symptom of the asthma patient thinking they're breathing through a straw. It's because there's too much airway resistance because of the constriction of the bronchioles. And that's asthma. We use two names here for the different kind of conditions that are respiratory pathologies. One of them is an obstructive disease. When we mention a disease that is of an obstructive nature, what we mean is that it's a problem in the airways. So if the airways are narrowed, the lung otherwise seems fine and the alveoli are fine, but the airways, how to get air into them, is too constricted. So that's the example I just gave recently of asthma. You could have bronchitis. You have a lot of mucus in there, so it's getting the air to the lung that's the problem. So that is called an obstructive disorder of the airways. We want to be able to tell that apart from a restrictive disease or a restrictive disorder. And this has to do with the inability of getting now let me change that. Let me word it differently. The inability of the lung to function normally. So the lung itself is compromised. So you can sort of bring air to it, but there is fibrosis and that lung can't expand. You could have a tumor. That's a very good example. If you have a tumor and you're not able to inflate the lung because you have this growth there. So it's the lung itself that has a problem, not so much the airway arriving to the lung. In this case, this individual would have a vital capacity which is reduced. So with a tumor, they're trying to inhale maximally, and they're not able to fill that lung completely. So something is restricting that inflation. It could even be a broken rib that's not allowing you to expand the chest. It's not allowing that lung to inflate completely. So that's a restrictive disease. These two have always given me a lot of trouble because obstructive sounds just like restrictive and you can get them confused very easily. So try and think of them separately, in that if it's an obstruction, it's to the airway only, and if it's a restriction of the actual enlarging of the lung. But those two words are too similar. So I'm going to stop there. And thanks for listening. We'll continue on this chapter. It's quite long. Thanks. Bye-bye.